Empires fell, scrolls burned. But the truth survived, hidden, waiting. Now, through time itself, we uncover what history tried to erase. Truth through time. Faith, history, secrets the world forgot. How Christianity survived the Roman Empire. A 4-part documentary series. Episode 1. Christianity's Birth in a Pagan World. History is often written by the victors, but sometimes it's defined by the survivors. In the 1st century, the Roman Empire ruled the known world with unmatched power and discipline. It enforced peace with iron swords, silenced dissent with crucifixions, and crushed rebellions with ruthless efficiency. In such a world, the idea that a tiny group of provincial followers, led by a crucified man, could spark a movement that would one day reshape the entire Western world seems not just unlikely but impossible. Yet that is exactly what happened. This is the story of how Christianity survived the Roman Empire. It is not only a religious narrative but a historical marvel, how a faith born on the fringes of empire endured political hostility, cultural misunderstanding, and violent persecution. In this 4-part documentary series, we trace that improbable journey and uncover the historical forces, social networks, and spiritual convictions that allowed it to survive and even thrive in the very heart of the empire that tried to extinguish it. In this first episode, Christianity's Birth in a Pagan World, we dive into the origins of the Christian movement, the world of Roman-occupied Judea, the role of Pontius Pilate, the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, and how his followers, first seen as a Jewish sect, planted the seeds of a global faith. To understand how Christianity survived, we must first understand how it began. Our journey begins in Judea, under Roman rule, with a Roman prefect and a Jewish teacher whose death would change the world. The Roman world of Judea. In the early 1st century, the Roman Empire was at its height. It stretched from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of northern Europe. Rome had conquered Judea, a small but fiercely religious province in the eastern Mediterranean. The Jewish people were monotheistic. They worshipped one God and rejected the pantheon of Roman deities. This made them culturally and spiritually distinct from nearly every other subject of the empire. Rome tolerated the Jews, but only so far as they remained obedient. The Roman policy was simple: pay taxes, don't rebel, and honor Caesar. Any deviation was dealt with swiftly and often brutally. Roman governors were sent to the region not to make friends, but to keep order. Enter Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was appointed as the Roman prefect of Judea around 26 AD. He wasn't a senator or high-ranking nobleman, but rather a middle-tier Roman administrator whose main responsibility was to keep peace and collect taxes. Pilate's rule was marked by tension with the Jewish population. Ancient historians like Philo and Josephus describe him as a harsh, inflexible ruler who showed little sensitivity to Jewish customs. He had a reputation for cruelty and corruption. Pilate made several missteps during his tenure, bringing Roman military standards bearing images of Caesar into Jerusalem, violating sacred Jewish spaces, and violently suppressing protests. Each action widened the rift between Rome and the Jewish people. He governed with a heavy hand and was deeply unpopular. But Pilate was also a man under pressure. Any sign of unrest in Judea could cost him his position, or worse, his life. So when Jewish religious leaders brought Jesus to him, demanding his execution, Pilate found himself in a political trap. The trial of Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth was brought before Pilate early one morning. The charges? Claiming to be King of the Jews, a title that could be interpreted as political rebellion. Pilate interrogated Jesus, trying to understand whether he truly posed a threat to Roman authority. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus told Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." This answer placed Pilate in a difficult position. Jesus did not claim military power, Yet the priests insisted he was dangerous. Pilate saw no real crime but feared that releasing Jesus could spark a riot or alienate the influential Jewish elite. As the crowd grew louder, shouting, "Crucify him!" Pilate symbolically washed his hands, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. But the Roman governor gave the final order: crucifixion. The meaning of crucifixion. Crucifixion was not just a form of execution, it was a message. It was Rome's way of saying, "This is what happens to those who challenge us." Reserved for slaves, rebels, and enemies of the state, crucifixion was slow, agonizing, and public. By crucifying Jesus, Rome meant to silence him forever. Instead, it amplified his message. The resurrection belief. 3 days after Jesus' death, something unexpected happened. His followers began to proclaim that he had risen from the dead. This claim, outrageous to some and inspiring to others, became the cornerstone of the Christian faith. It transformed a humiliating execution into a divine triumph. The belief in the resurrection gave Jesus' disciples new courage. They believed Jesus was not defeated by Rome but had conquered death itself. And they began to spread his teachings, first in Jerusalem, then across Judea, and eventually throughout the Roman Empire. Why this moment was critical? Had Jesus simply been another rebel crucified by Rome, his name might have been forgotten. But the resurrection belief changed everything. It turned the cross from a symbol of shame into a symbol of hope. It gave rise to a new identity, one rooted not in military power or political ambition, but in sacrifice, love, and faith. Pontius Pilate faded into history. Jesus, the condemned man, became the cornerstone of a global movement. The Jewish roots of Christianity. It's important to understand that the first Christians were not called Christians. They were Jews. They saw Jesus not as the founder of a new religion, but as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. They continued to worship in synagogues, follow Jewish customs, and observe the Torah. The early movement was called the Way, and it was seen by many as just another Jewish sect. Jerusalem became the center of this new sect. Jesus' disciples, led by Peter, began preaching publicly. On the day of Pentecost, according to the book of Acts, thousands were converted in a single day. These new believers were Jews who saw Jesus as the promised Messiah. But not all Jews accepted this. Religious leaders viewed the movement as dangerous, even heretical. One man, Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee trained in the law, took it upon himself to stamp it out. Persecution begins. Early tensions erupted within the Jewish community. One of the first Christian deacons, Stephen, was stoned to death by a Jewish mob, becoming the first Christian martyr. Persecution scattered believers across the region. But instead of destroying the movement, this dispersion caused it to spread. Christians began to settle in cities with large Jewish populations: Antioch, Damascus, Alexandria, and eventually Rome. They preached first in synagogues, sharing the message of Jesus as the Messiah. Some Jews accepted, others rejected. Paul and the expansion beyond Judaism. The very man who once persecuted Christians, Saul of Tarsus, had a vision of Jesus on the road to Damascus. He became Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. Paul understood that the message of Jesus wasn't just for Jews, but for all humanity. He began planting churches across the Roman Empire. But Paul always started in the same place, Jewish synagogues. He would preach first to the Jews, then to the God-fearing Gentiles who attended synagogue, and finally to the broader pagan community. Paul's letters, or epistles, to these early churches form a large portion of the New Testament. In them, we see the struggle of identity. Should Gentile converts follow the law of Moses? Must they be circumcised? Eat kosher? These debates defined the early church. Eventually, it became clear that Christianity was growing beyond its Jewish roots. from sect to separate faith. As more Gentiles joined the movement, the distance between traditional Judaism and Christianity grew. Christians began meeting in homes rather than synagogues. They developed distinct practices: baptism, the Eucharist, and new forms of worship. Christians also began to develop a new theological language. Jesus was no longer just seen as a prophet or teacher, but as the divine Son of God, co-equal with the Father, a radical belief that reshaped the very definition of monotheism. The doctrine of the Trinity began to take shape, even if not fully formed. By the end of the 1st century, Christianity was no longer seen as just a sect of Judaism. It had become something entirely new. And yet, its survival was anything but guaranteed. Christianity was born in tension, between Roman law and Jewish tradition, between empire and faith. But it had only just begun its journey. In our next episode, we'll explore how Christians faced brutal persecution at the hands of emperors, how the faith was tested in blood and fire, and how the very empire that tried to destroy it would one day call it its own. If this journey moved you, subscribe and stay with us. The next chapter of this story is even more extraordinary. Subscribe and tap the bell icon to walk with us through powerful stories of faith and history. Thumbs up like if this episode touched you. Speech balloon comment to share your thoughts or reflections in comment section.